All right, so here we are in part 2 of assignment 11, and now we're going to be talking about run-on sentences. So if you think about it, a fragment is kind of a sentence that doesn't have enough information to really be its own sentence. Run-on sentences are sentences that have kind of too much stuff put in without the proper punctuation. So run-on sentences are something we want to avoid so we don't end up like the sad puppy here getting in trouble for our run-on sentences. So let's talk about what a run-on sentence is. So a run-on sentence is two independent clauses or two sentences that could each stand on their own, joined incorrectly. So there are a couple ways that they can be joined incorrectly. The first one, this is kind of what we sometimes just hear is called as a run-on sentence. It's a fused sentence. And this occurs when two sentences are incorrectly joined without punctuation at all. Here's an example. The economy has improved, many people still do not have jobs. Basically what I have here are two different complete thoughts that I've put together with no punctuation at all in between them. Next version is a comma splice. Some of us are very familiar with this term. So a comma splice occurs when two sentences are incorrectly joined with just a comma. So in this case, we still have the two same ideas, but there's just a comma between the two ideas, and that's, once again, an error. We cannot join two complete sentences with just a comma. By the way, feel free to pause this anytime and take notes and then just keep on going or watching different parts again. So what do we do if we have a run-on? Well, first of all, hopefully we avoid them in the first place. But if we need to correct a run-on, there's 5 ways to do it. The first and probably most simple way is to just create two separate sentences out of the run-on. So we have two complete ideas here. The economy has improved and many people still do not have jobs. One way we can correct that is just by placing a period between them and making them two separate sentences. And remember, we want to capitalize this M here since we're starting a new sentence. So that's the first way to correct a run-on. The second way is to use a comma and a coordinating conjunction, also known as FANBOY words, to connect our ideas. So the economy has improved, comma, but many people still do not have jobs. So we're going to take one of these FANBOY's words and combine it with a comma, and now we have a correct way of connecting two complete ideas. Remember, we can only connect two complete ideas with a comma if we have one of those FANBOY's words after it. And you always want to make sure you choose the FANBOY word that makes sense, because it wouldn't really make sense to say the economy has improved, comma, so many people still do not have jobs. You can see how that doesn't make sense, but makes sense. So let's keep going. Third way. The third way to do it is just put a semicolon between the two complete ideas. Keep in mind, I like to tell my students semicolons are kind of like the cayenne pepper of punctuation. A little bit goes a long way. If you have a semicolon in like every sentence or every other sentence, it starts to feel a little redundant. So, you know, a couple semicolons in a paper is probably good, but we don't want to completely overdo it because they're pretty conspicuous. We notice them because they stick out. Number 4. We can use a semicolon followed by a transitional word or phrase and a comma to connect ideas. So basically, anytime we're connecting two independent clauses with a transition word other than one of those FANBOY's words, something like however, for example, we would use a semicolon, the transition word, and a comma. So the economy has improved, semicolon, however, comma, many people still do not have jobs. So in this case, we're using a semicolon and a non-FANBOY's transition word to connect the two complete ideas. Let's keep going. Number 5. Our 5th way of doing it is to use a dependent word. We learned about these last week when we were talking about complex sentences. We can use a dependent word, things like although, because, when, to connect ideas, because basically what we're doing then is we're taking a run-on and we're turning it into a complex sentence. So, although the economy has improved, comma, many people still do not have jobs. This is a correct sentence because we have one dependent clause and one independent clause. Now we just have a complex sentence. We could also use something like even though the economy has improved, many people still do not have jobs. That's perfectly grammatically correct as well. Let's go on. So let's look a little more in depth at each method. Method 1, once again, you correct a run-on or a comma splice using a period. Basically, we got to figure out, okay, where does this run-on break down into two different ideas or two complete thoughts? Parker Brothers turned down Darrow's first offer to sell Monopoly, comma. The company has now sold over 200 million games. So we just figure out, okay, the break in ideas occurs after Monopoly. So I can just put a period after Monopoly, put a capital T, and make it two separate sentences. Let's look at one more example of the method 2. So method 2, if you remember, was using a coordinating conjunction with a comma. So the automaker paid a fee, Will Smith drove an Audi in iRobot. As you can see, even when I was reading it, I had a little trouble figuring out where I should stop because it's a run-on sentence and it's hard to tell where one idea ends and the next one begins. So I'm going to figure it out. The automaker paid a fee, Will Smith drove an Audi in iRobot. So it seems like somewhere in here is where I need to put an indication that these are two separate ideas. So if I want to do that with a comma and a coordinating conjunction or a fanboys word, I can do it this way. The automaker paid a fee, comma, so Will Smith drove an Audi in iRobot. Or I could say the automaker paid a fee, comma, and Will Smith drove an Audi in iRobot. Both of those make sense. So that's method 2. Method 3, if you remember, is to correct using a semicolon. So just like in the other examples, I got to figure out where this breaks down into two separate ideas. Caffeine is the primary ingredient in most energy drinks. This chemical stimulates the central nervous system and increases alertness. Have you figured out where the break in the two ideas is? I think that it is after drinks, because that's where this first idea ends and this next idea begins. So what could I do? I can, after drinks, just put a semicolon, right? That's indicating to the reader, this is a complete idea and this is a complete idea. Keep in mind with semicolons, almost always we can only use semicolons to join two different thoughts that could stand on their own. So caffeine is a primary ingredient in most energy drinks. That could definitely stand on its own. It has a subject, it has a verb, and it's a complete thought. This chemical stimulates the central nervous system and increases alertness. That could also stand on its own. We have a subject, this chemical, we have a verb, stimulates, and it's a complete thought. That's how we know we can use this semicolon correctly. If you remember, method 4 was to correct using a semicolon and a non-fanboys transitional word. So Geisel wrote many of his books as poetry, comma, he illustrated most of his own books. And then I'm going to use in addition to connect these ideas. So I'm figuring out that this is where the ideas break down into two different ideas. So I'm going to put a semicolon there, and then I can put in addition and a comma. So now it's Geisel wrote many of his books as poetry, semicolon. In addition, he illustrated most of his own books. Now I've got a great sentence. All right, and then method 5 was correct using a dependent word. So advertisers and politicians want to reach as many people as possible. They too are finding ways to use text messages. So as it is here, I have two complete thoughts connected with just a comma. That is a comma splice, right? I got to fix that. So I figure out I can use a dependent word. If I add a dependent word to one of these different clauses, I can make it a complete complex sentence. And if I use because, that forms the right kind of relationship, right? Because advertisers and politicians want to reach as many people as possible, comma, they too are finding ways to use text messages. Now I have a really nice, complete, complex sentence. So, writing grammatically correct sentences that avoid run-ons can result in higher scores on compositions. And so, dun dun dun, victory is yours. I know it's hard to think that any of this stuff is important. Grammar can be kind of dry, but it really does matter. It matters in your final exam. It matters in the paragraphs that you write. It matters when you're emailing your boss, all this kind of stuff, right? Clarity is our main goal. We want people to be able to understand us. And if you're able to avoid run-ons, it's like few sentences and comma splices, it'll make your writing so much more clear, and you can be as victorious as this baby eating sand. And isn't that everyone's goal? All right, so now you're ready to go on to your Journal 11 and put all this to practice.